Okay, we are back for lecture number 12, the second part of marketing research. Some of the concepts that we've already gone through, we'll explore them a little more in depth here. But this is very important to marketing, as you might gather. But I don't want you to be concerned. If you're going into marketing, like I said before, oftentimes there are people who will focus their careers on the research aspect of marketing. So while you need to be informed, you need to understand how it works. If you don't consider yourself the math researcher type person, that's okay. Marketing has a place for all kinds of people. So let's look through this a little bit, the marketing research process. We've talked about this before, defining the problem, obtaining the data, analyzing the data, recommending solution, and applying the results. No problem, right? Easy, right? Well, there's a few more things to it than that. So it's a very logical way of thinking. If you think about research, you must go through these steps. You can't skip anything. Your results will be skewed and they're not going to yield the right information that you're looking for. So always make sure that you're doing your due diligence and you're going through each one of these steps in the process. So let's talk through them. Defining the problem. It's problem definition. Any of you guys that may be eventually moving on to graduate studies or even further, you will hear this time and time again about problem definition. If you have to write a thesis or if you move on and you write a dissertation, problem definition is of course the first step. We need to clearly identify what the problem is, and then we can take those steps to figure out what we need to do to solve it. Sometimes we're just lacking information that will help us establish a good path forward. So we need to define what the problem is. And we can't be spaghetti on a wall. It's got to be a singular type of issue that we are able to question and then get feedback on. Where a lot of researchers go awry, especially early in their career, is they allow the marketer to ask too broad of a question. And then it's very difficult to parse that information out and figure out what is what. So very, very clearly define what the problem is and put it in narrow guardrails. So we're going to talk about a concept here, a marketing research example. Let's say we have a local pizza place. They have great food, they have great atmosphere, but it lacks an online presence and it limits potential to reach customers. What's the problem here? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to understand? So we're going to kind of work through that here in a minute. We're going to obtain the data. So obviously, what we need to do is we need to formulate a hypothesis. For example, does online ordering, does it really limit our customers? Are they fine with not having it? Would we make more money and sell more and reach more customers if we had online ordering? That's a hypothesis. A hypothesis would be, yes, I think that it's limiting our customer base and our ability to earn a lot of money. So during this point, we collect data and then we examine what the problem is. So our marketing team that believes that an increased online presence could attract new customers and increase potential in sales for the pizzeria. That's our hypothesis. We think that will happen. So our next step is to design and administer a research tool. And we call them tools. It's not necessarily a survey. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can use in order to collect data about this. So this is where we go back to what we've talked about before, primary versus secondary data. Just a quick update again. Primary data, this is data that is collected for the first time. It is unique to us. It's used specifically for the problem being studied. Oftentimes we're using observations, interviews, or we're surveying, but we are the ones creating the survey, and it is about our specific problem at hand. Secondary data that's been collected by someone else, okay? It's information that you can find on the internet, census, government data, all those. It may be syndicated data. Syndicated data, like I've said before, is data that we might see that a company has researched millennial consumers and we buy that research, although it's not specific to our problem. When we try to solve our problem specifically against purchased data that we didn't originate, we would call that meta-analysis. Just that's not something you need to know unless you're interested in research, but that kind of gives you an idea when people say that, what they're talking about. So we obtain data. We either have to, go in and spend the money for primary data, and that is, it can be quite expensive, or we're going to go the route of secondary data, and we're going to see if we can answer our question that way. Sometimes primary data is really the only way to be able to answer the question, even though it is more expensive and it takes a great deal more time. Okay, sources of secondary data, internet sources, US state and government sources, right? We talked about that, census data, Bureau, US Census and Bureau, the Security and Exchange Commission, Bureau of Labor Statistics, all of those, and business publications, of course, will all have secondary data. Not all secondary data is free. In fact, a lot of it you must pay for, unless it's US government sources, then of course, a lot of that is available for free. Secondary data, some of the advantages: it's easily obtained and it's accessible. It saves time, it saves money. This says often free. I find that, that depends on where your source is. If it's government type of data, it can be. But if it's other types of data, it definitely can come at a cost, and sometimes a fairly significant cost, depending on what your budget looks like. It may be insignificant of a cost compared to primary data, though. Disadvantages: it may not be suitable for answering the question, and it can be inaccurate depending on what source you use. So sources of primary data, surveys. A lot of times we'll do surveys. That's a research technique. You know what surveys are. Since the market is too big to survey, we have to choose a sample. And that sample is referred to, you'll see a lot of people say N. What's your N? That's your sample. That's what N stands for if you've had statistics. Surveys can be conducted online, over the phone, by mail, in person. They have a variety of ways of doing it, but that's just one type of tool. That's an instrument, one type of research instrument. Okay, they're easy to administer, but surveys can sometimes be expensive and have very low response rates. Okay, other types of primary data, interview methods. Focus groups are one type of interview method. You can do a one-on-one type of interview. Focus groups will have a moderator and they'll accomplish the objectives. Observation, sometimes just sitting and watching people over a period of time. It seems like crazy that would work, but there is a very specific way that you have to do observational data. So it's not just simply going to the mall and watching a bunch of people. You have to kind of have there's a real rigor to doing observation. It's faster. People are not aware that they're being observed. Mystery shopping is a form of observation, often coupled with a survey, of course. So there's a couple of different things there. There's experimental methods. This is where the researcher looks at the results of changing one or more marketing variables while keeping everything under control. These are often A/B tests. That's what we would call them, marketed researchers. Changing the color of a product or of a packaging of a laundry detergent while keeping everything else the same. Did it encourage more people to buy? There is obviously a lot of psychology in color, so this is an interesting type of study that somebody might want to pursue. Okay, step 3, analyze the data. We've done whatever we're doing, either primary or secondary data collection, and we're now got the data that we want to analyze. This is the process of compiling and analyzing and interpreting the results. You have to sort the data and see if it makes sense and how it fits. It's like having a big, huge Lego kit and dumping it all out. It's not going to get to be the Harry Potter castle on its own or the Titanic ship on its own. You've got to build it all up. And so that's in the way that we would analyze the data. We sort it. It's like a puzzle. We're going to sort it out and then we're going to make it work. So with our pizza thing, after you've collected the data, your research team will analyze the data and look for trends. For our pizzeria example, it might be important that to understand that social media platforms are most used by your target market. And how do they understand about all the online process that you have? What does the data tell us? All right, that's really what we're looking for. And a lot of times data will kind of confirm or refute a hypothesis, but sometimes we'll get some really interesting, unique things that we never thought about from the data. So it's always interesting, especially when we use data collection methods such as observations or interviews or things, or focus groups. Then we can really get some really unique insights. Okay, step 4 recommends solutions. These are the conclusions that are drawn from our research, right? It needs to be easy to understand. You need to be able to tell someone else. Data can be complicated, but how you frame that narrative to another person can be very important and able to kind of form that next strategy going forward. So for the pizzeria, in this step, we want to create a detailed recommendation to solve the problem. We can only make recommendations based on the data. We don't go outside of that, okay? We can say other things are for future consideration, maybe future research, but we can only say these are the things the data supported and informed. That's what we're looking for. Step 5, apply the results. So this is where we actually have this information we're going to move forward with, and we're going to be strategic about it. So I've said before, strategy and tactics. Now we can form a strategy and we can create those tactics of how we get there off of that. So this is where we put our recommendations into play. For our pizzeria, in this step, we put our recommendations into action. We are going to say that one of our recommendations was to create social media accounts, and this is where we would do that, and then we monitor and see if that has any discernible effect on our sales. Did it increase it or did it do nothing? All right, so let's talk about surveys. So surveys are often used to just understand how well customers recognize their products, right? When we talked about branding, it's brand and awareness. What is the awareness that I have on my product itself? Brand awareness is recall of the brand. So we'll see several things like this when it asks you to check the types of boxes. What are the top of mind energy drinks, for example, on this one? Brand awareness is recognition. It'll ask you, once we've determined what your recall is, unprompted, then we'll kind of narrow it into something like a recognition. Do you recognize these or not? Do you know what these brands are? Brand image. We want to know that if a customer has awareness for a brand and how their feelings are around it. Okay. We understand when they see a particular type of brand image, what kind of feelings that invokes in them. All right. So if you wanted to tell your friends about your health insurance, how would you describe it? Use a short phrase. This gives us a good idea of kind of what their behavior and attitude is toward it. Customer satisfaction. We'll use surveys to measure customer satisfaction. And if it's rising or falling or what's happening with it, we always want the highest satisfaction. So what can we do to get in front of it if we see that our satisfaction is changing? Net promoter score. This is how likely that you would recommend a brand to a friend or a colleague. That's all your net promoter score actually is. It is a specific type of survey measure where experienced customers have with brands, and you can kind of see here the different types of things: promoters, passives, and detractors. And you can see it can be done as a ranking or a scale as well. And this is an example of that. How do we design a survey? It is complicated. It is very scientific how surveys are done. So don't take the next few slides as the gospel for how a survey should be designed. It is very complicated, and there are people who just do this for a living. They don't even do the research. They just create the survey instrument. Okay, so a well-constructed survey motivates people to complete the questions and provide accurate information. It provides validity questions. So we want to make sure that we understand accurate information about the problem, and it's reliable. It's going to get the same results no matter how many times you administer the survey to the same person. Obviously, different people will respond differently, but if you gave me the same survey over and over and over again, then I would, you'd get fairly similar results. That has been some of the backlash on some of the personality profiles and surveys, is that it can be very dependent on mood, time of day, or different things that are going on with an individual, and that they may not get the same results over and over again. So that's some of the stuff, reliability that exists with some of those personality profiles, because that is a type of survey. All right, to be valid and reliable, a survey must be written, formatted, and administered very properly. Okay, I know that is very common sense. When we write survey questions, what are the kinds of survey questions we can have? We can have these force choice questions, right? We ask them to choose from a certain set of possibilities. This is yes or no. There's, you have to choose one of the above. We're forcing them into a specific type of a choice. They can't leave it blank. Open-ended asks someone to construct their own response. How do you feel about Amazon not delivering 2 days anymore? That gives you an idea. You can answer that question. It's not a yes or no, and it's not forced. Okay, yes, no questions. These are questions that are only given between the two responses, yes or a no. And the problem with a yes, no question is that you have to make sure when you're asking it is direct enough that there's no other interpretation between a yes or no. Can't ask anything else in between. It's got to be, do you like blue? Yes or no. So you have to be very specific about that. Sometimes questions are confusing, and they're not really a yes or no. Sometimes they're, there's something else. So it is a yes or no. You want to push them into a very specific answer. Are you a member of our rewards program? Yes or no. If you are not a current member of our rewards program, are you interested in becoming a member? Yes or no. So this is something where we call this a decision tree. The answer to one would prompt another answer here. If you said no, it would load up that next question. Are you interested? Okay, multiple choice questions. This gives the option to pick between a number of different things. It's important that we make these options mutually exclusive, right? If I'm forcing you to pick one, I can't have several. If I say, hey, what is your favorite food? Or what food do you like, rather? Pizza, burgers, sandwiches, and ice cream. Well, maybe I like all of them. So you need to say, what is your most favorite food of all of these? And you can check. So that's kind of how we do. Make sure that they're mutually exclusive in it. So there's an individual would not have multiple answers. Okay, multiple choice example. Which options best describe how often you shop at our store? Very specific. So let's go to the next one. Rating scale. This is where we ask respondents to rate a product or service based upon a scale. You will see most of these will be done on satisfaction, agreement, beliefs, things like that. You're completely satisfied, you're completely not satisfied. So you'll see those kinds of scales all the time. And I know that you guys have definitely seen this. All right, here's just one example of a star rating scale question. How would you rate my service? Poor to excellent for the number of stars. Rating scale statements are like rating scale questions, except that they respond to a statement rather than a question. Okay, so a little bit different there. Rating scale statement would be, when I shop at X store, I can find all of the grocery items I need without visiting another store. I agree or I disagree, somewhere on that scale. So that is a statement and not a question. So what about writing questions in general? You got to be clear, you got to be brief. You've got to avoid bias and leading. Would you agree that blue is the most beautiful color of all time? That is a very leading question. That encourages the respondent to answer in a very specific way. Yes, because you said you led them into the answer. We want to avoid leading questions at all cost, and we want to avoid bias. Okay, so otherwise you will get the answer that you want to get, but it may not be very reliable or accurate. So here's all the different things in creating a survey, just kind of a list of things. Customer behavior. Why do customers do what they do? Consumer behavior really is about, not necessarily, it's not easy to obtain. Consumers act in various ways, and sometimes it's not easy to put into a box and quantify, right? Usually we would need to use primary data in order to derive why a consumer feels or acts a certain way about our brand, product, or service. Behavior can come from awareness, intention, motivation, attitudes, psychographic, demographic, sociographics, all of these different things. What are some of the common mistakes that folks make in survey designs? Well, they fail to build a survey around the research question. We talked about that early on. They start thinking, oh, we're going to spend all this money. Let's start answering other questions. And it gets very convoluted. And then the results can't really easily be interpreted as to how to answer the question you really wanted to address to begin with. They fail to understand their survey population. They go out, and rather than getting a representative sample, and maybe they don't fully understand who their customer is, and they say, oh, our customer is definitely women between 35 and 55, and that's really all they sample. But it turns out that's not accurate. Maybe it's broader than that. Maybe it's a different customer. So they fail to really understand the survey population. They get too few of people a lot of times as well. And they forget to explain the purpose of the survey, why they're even doing this. Some of the other things, they structure the questions poorly. There's too many answer choices that confuses respondents, too few. And I'm like, well, I guess I have to choose one of these. You forced me into it. You've told me why, blue is the most beautiful color ever. Yes or no? Okay. There's too many open-ended questions, and we get survey fatigue. People don't want to finish. There's overly complex questions or inconsistent responses. Failure to include other or I don't know. A lot of times that will happen, and leading questions like I talked about before. Some of the other survey design mistakes that we ask too many questions. A typical survey shouldn't go on for half an hour or so, but I have seen plenty of surveys that do. You have to keep it brief and you have to be very specific. We often start broad and then we go very detailed, because by the time we get to a place where we're asking them very specific or very personal questions, we've gotten a lot of the broad stuff out of the way. If we start asking personal questions up front, people will tend to want to stop the survey. Asking too few questions. We can't ask just 5 or 6 questions and get any information. Putting most of the important questions at the end. I say important, I meant personal, of course. I mean, you want to get your important questions up there. You just want your personal questions to be at the end, requiring participants to answer all the questions. You need to allow them to opt out. This has been our second marketing research lecture. I appreciate you sticking with me. I know these can sometimes be a little tough, but hopefully this has shed a little bit more light, and I will see you guys all in the very next lecture. Thanks so much.